So I recently replayed Metal Gear Solid 4, and doing that kind of forced me to be honest with myself about how I felt about that game back in 2008 and how I feel about it now. I think Metal Gear Solid 4 represents the worst of what Metal Gear Solid was up until that point, but it led to the best of what Metal Gear Solid would become. So I want to preempt the backlash. I know I'll get it for saying that and mention that, unless you're familiar with me, you may not know that I love Metal Gear. I'm obsessed with Metal Gear. So while me saying that might sound to you like a Philistine that doesn't really get Metal Gear, that's just shitting on this beloved game just to be edgy because there's a new version of it out. That's not the case. I can promise you it's coming from a person that loves the series and appreciates its creators. But there was this period of time in my life when, looking back at it, that appreciation I think was kind of given unequivocally and in a few ways a little blindly. Metal Gear Solid was so formative to me and my life that in hindsight, I think I was a lot kinder to Metal Gear Solid 4 than I would be now. I think I recognized Metal Gear Solid's flaws, but I treated it in the same way that you recognize the issues with your parents. You can see them, but you don't dwell on them too much because they're your parents. They raised you, they shaped you, and they cared for you. You are who you are in large part because of them. So there's an almost kind of instinctual image protection defense mechanism that kicks in when you try and criticize your own parents or think negatively about them for the most part. That doesn't tend to happen as you get older. That mechanism doesn't kick in when you're older because, you're a little more confident in yourself and your identity isn't tied to your parents or, in this case, a video game in the Metal Gear Solid series. And playing Metal Gear Solid 4 as part of the Master Collection Volume 2, that mechanism definitely did not kick in on this latest playthrough in the same way that it did all those years ago in my first playthrough. This time it was just raw dogging moments in the game that hit like embarrassing childhood memories. And people always talk about Metal Gear Solid being this mixture of like po-faced commentary on war and society, but also silly and campy. I agree with that. And I think of it as a series that is able to walk the line between saying something meaningful and also acting like an idiot. And what I realized with this playthrough of MGS4 was that it starts acting like an idiot very quickly, like right out of the gate. The Metal Gear Solid games usually open with table settings in a way that grounds the game. They each lay out these stakes, which are always very high. The situation is also very serious, and you, Snake, are the person that's going to deal with it all. Metal Gear Solid 1, terrorists have taken over an island and are threatening to launch a nuke. Metal Gear Solid 2, more terrorists have taken over an offshore oil cleanup facility and are demanding $30 million. Also, they have the president. Metal Gear Solid 3, infiltrate Selino-Yarsk and recover the Soviet scientist named Nikolai Stepanovich Sokolov, who defected to the United States, but then back and forth trades, go get him. Metal Gear Solid 4, head into the Middle Eastern war zone to assassinate the head of the private military company industrial complex PMC industry man. From that point on, there's usually in these games, once that's established, there's like this slow slide from being serious into more of a middle position where those games, the Metal Gear games, can comfortably now say something meaningful, but also act like an idiot now and then. And as players, that means that we're able to stand over that line that separates those two tones with one foot planted on each side. That process, it gives us the ability to establish steady footing so that when it throws, let's say, the way that propaganda and propagation of information can be used to shape society, and then moments later you're smooching the poster of a hot lady inside a locker, you're not knocked completely off your feet by either of them. There's this kind of push and pull that keeps you on your feet and for the most part keeps the tones balanced. That, I think, is crucial to the identity of Metal Gear Solid. That is how it does the po-faced, but also camp. I think Metal Gear Solid 4 screws that up and it knocks you off balance. Some of this is because, we have years of narrative baggage that creates something that feels like the game as a concept is jumping the shark from the outset. All that PMC stuff is set up for maybe people who don't have context or newcomers. And I think it's largely inoffensive to most of those people's sensibilities. But fans, we know that Metal Gear Solid 4 is actually about going into a Middle Eastern war zone to assassinate a cowboy that's been possessed by your genetically superior twin, whose consciousness was transferred through an arm amputated by a cyborg ninja in a room filled with C4, wired to the president of a leading weapons manufacturer. And also, he's the head of a private military company, industrial complex, PMC thing. That is what it's really about. We knew that going in. So jumping the shark with that premise is something that we buy into. The average non-obsessed fan just saw a war-torn setting and menacing dude. That was it. And then old Snake, let's go. What makes Metal Gear Solid different is that the period of time where the series goes and slides into the spot where you can plant your feet on both sides of the tone spectrum and maintain that footing, it was not gradual at all. I remember watching the live action segments at the beginning of Metal Gear Solid back when it first released and just marveling at how cool it was. This time around, I watched that army themed fat burning workout class promotion ad thing for 3 minutes and was like, damn, this is how they opened with it. And I think it kind of led to me recognizing it for what it was, a very clear sign that tonally this game is going to be a mess. And also, it's going to be very indulgent of the creative whims of its director. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. I still enjoyed watching that bit, along with the talk show style interview thing featuring David Hayter. I'm a big fan of that. But back then, I didn't see it as a sign of what Metal Gear Solid was going to be, at least not in a way that allowed me to step back and almost criticize it. That's up until the introduction of Rat Patrol Team 1, which is led by Meryl Silverberg, returning character. We're introduced to the members of that crew, and among them there's that giant burly dude who's got an exclamation mark mohawk, and Akiba, a soldier with bowel issues that for most of the first chapter is just shitting himself and having his teammates tell him not to stand downwind, or basically in every skirmish pinching their nose and calling him Stinky Poo Poo Man and just taking the piss out of him. Metal Gear Solid 4 jumps the shark in-game, minus the premise stuff, whether you have the series context or not, immediately. And for me, I don't think it gets all the way back up after face planting into that wacky side of the tonal spectrum. I'll admit, I have a much lower tolerance of that campy, goofy stuff than most, but I'm not above it at all. Like, I enjoyed Johnny Sasaki, or Akiba, yes, same guy, when he was tied up naked in the background of MGS1's first major set piece, had his butthole out and pixelated. I enjoyed that. And I spent way too much time repeatedly making Raiden just slip on bird shit in MGS2 and all that kind of stuff, you know? But I like that stuff in small doses and like balanced out. Metal Gear Solid 4 has these lengthy sequences of nonsense that are just not part of any sort of balance. They're imbalance. That is one of the things that led me to that thought where Metal Gear Solid 4 kind of embodies some of the worst tendencies of the creator and the series up until that point. It felt like it overcommitted to comedy instead of realizing that what it does well is smart use of comic relief. And to me, overcommitment to comedy, that is not what Metal Gear Solid is. The first chapter of Metal Gear Solid 4 is also where we're introduced to the Beauty and the Beast unit. The female soldiers that are outfitted with these special suits, and each one is aligned with an animal and an emotion, basically Power Rangers. I remember watching that scene and being like hyped, ready, primed, just on the edge of my seat to see cool new weird bosses that Kojima and the crew made up, especially after the Cobra unit in 3. I was ready for that. And while they were definitely weird, they were also disappointing in a way that I didn't really admit to myself back then, but now I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, this is kind of disappointing. And this playthrough, I couldn't get over how they were just basically black shapes jumping around, killing things and making noises. That scene for me, like, it wasn't like one of the moments where you're like, oh my God, what are these things? In the same way it was for the Cobra unit or any other boss introduction. It felt more like a, what the hell am I supposed to be looking at here? What is this? And eventually you learn that all of those members of the B&B unit are hot ladies with PTSD, which is a whole other weird thing, but the B&B unit overall just doesn't make a good first impression. And I think a lot of that is because of the focus on cinematic action. And this game is full of that. If you go back and look at how each boss are introduced in the first 3 games, it's pretty restrained. And in some cases, they make an effort to make it intimate. Your first encounter with Revolver Ocelot is a conversation. It's basically Revolver Ocelot going, "Hello, my name is Revolver Ocelot, and I am good at spinning guns. Watch this," and then spin some guns. Anyways, don't touch those wires and the old man will blow, that kind of stuff. There aren't many boss intros in the series that don't go through that same kind of intimate introduction and, you know, getting up close and personal and exhibiting some unique quirk that makes them memorable. They kind of like get burned into your mind. Like Possession before Psycho Mantis, the bloody hallway before you fight the ninja, Meryl getting shot before you fight Sniper Wolf, and so on. That goes into MGS2 as well, where Fat Man skates in and goes on this maniacal rant. You see Fortune and Vamp on the strut bridges before you fight either of them, and it's the first instance of you learning that he seems to be immortal and she can't be shot. And then Metal Gear Solid 3 has the bees setting up the Cobra unit, the pain, immediately when you're trying to walk over the bridge with Sokolov. You get a good look at each member of the team. The End does his weird eye thing. And even the Sorrow, which is the most fantastical part of that game, appears pretty soon after that as a ghost. The difference between those is making those action-packed was not the priority. They all make a strong first impression to the point where I can basically quote each of those boss intro moments. But if you had asked me before I started replaying the Metal Gear Solid 4, how the B&B unit was introduced, I don't think I would have remembered. MGS4, I think, it just thinks looking cool and whipping the camera around like it's an action film is enough. And to me, that's not what Metal Gear Solid is. And then gameplay-wise, Metal Gear Solid 4 is the only game in the series where I don't feel like playing it stealthily. The first time through, I did, for sure. And even then, I remember feeling quite unsatisfied by the stealth. In the stealth bits, I felt unsatisfied. And then in the set-piece stealth bits, I also felt kind of annoyed. The walking segment, where you're just tailing someone, that was not good. And when I did play stealth, which I started doing in this time around, it just felt unnecessary to the point where I was just making the game more tedious for myself. Like on subsequent playthroughs, including this one, I have just gone guns blazing. And I found that it feels much better as an action game and not a stealth game. But because it's not quite built to be a pure action game, it plays a little awkwardly at times. And the Volume 2 version of it plays good, but that awkwardness is still there when you're trying to aim and shoot. But running and gunning my way through this Master Collection version has been a lot of fun, I have to admit that. But again, running and gunning, to me, that's not what Metal Gear is. And I know I sound like I hate Metal Gear Solid 4, and I repeat, I do not. I really love it. And replaying that in the Master Collection, which is a very good version of it, reinforced how much I love it. But I think I just love it in a different way now. I love it for what it is instead of what I needed it to be and what I thought it should be. Now I just recognize it for what it is, and that's a game that is messy and indulgent of the director's creative whims, but also that it's a game that, in many ways, is saying that the series has reached a dead end. It's Metal Gear's midlife crisis, and it's that point where it needed to evolve. And it did. Now I also see Metal Gear Solid 4 as where that next era of Metal Gear Solid, which I adore, started to emerge. It was the staging ground for what the series would be built into. Kojima's obsession with film is no secret, and neither is the fact that he makes games by drawing heavy inspiration from other mediums, primarily films. And in Metal Gear Solid 4, one of the things that I found quite jarring back then was that chapter format, the act format of it. There were a variety of narrative and technical reasons for doing that, probably. That segmented style of game, but I just wasn't into it back then. It wasn't as common, and I didn't like how it broke up the experience for me. I'm still not into it. But now I realize that also looking at it, it's also the first time that the Metal Gear Solid experience was kind of portioned out in that way. They weren't digestible, but they would become digestible portions eventually in Peace Walker, which is also available in the Volume 2 of the Master Collection and is a great version of it. That was built with bite-sized missions in mind, partly because Monster Hunter was all the rage back then, and the short but sweet sessions was a popular design format, but also because it played to the strengths of portable hardware. MGS5 is where it all came together in a way that I really appreciated. The short to medium-sized missions that treat themselves as an episode of a TV show really worked for me, way more than the chapter or act format. And I know Kojima probably loved it, given that it cites him as writer and director every single time you do any one of those missions. The games following Metal Gear Solid 4 have been able to strike a much better balance between the two wolves, the po-faced wolf and the idiot wolf inside Metal Gear Solid. And I think Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, is the best stealth action game ever made. Admittedly, yeah, the narrative isn't the best of the bunch, but it's still also not intrusive in the way that it is in Metal Gear Solid 4. It leaves more than enough space for the open-ended design and the satisfying gameplay to dominate that experience and be the prevailing memory of it. And that stuff is just so good that I still play that game just to feel something. But I think it's important for me that I recognize that Metal Gear Solid 4 helped the series evolve into that. It was the game where the pieces that make up Metal Gear Solid found a much better place for themselves after Metal Gear Solid 4. Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 5 created that harmony between the focus on cinematic action, the random moments of slapstick and comedy on top of that, and the heavy subject matter, the social commentary, and the perspective on global politics. And to me, that is what Metal Gear Solid is. So I guess I'm mea culpaing my younger self and being like, I think I liked Metal Gear Solid for a bit too much back then and maybe didn't call out some of the stuff that was bad about it. But in replaying it in the Master Collection, I still love that game, but now I see it as a game that instigated an evolution, a much needed evolution that gave us two of the best Metal Gear Solid games from that point on, in Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. So Metal Gear Solid 4, I don't like you, but also I love you. You are the best. But yeah, that's just some thoughts on the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2, which if you're a Metal Gear fan, it's a no-brainer. You got to play it. Ghost Babel is on there. Metal Gear Solid 4 is now free of the cell processor jail, and I guess by default that makes it the best way to play it. I haven't had any technical issues, so it's fantastic. Peace Walker is on there, so that is a whole lot of game as well, and the bonus content is super good. So I have been really enjoying my time with that game and using it as an opportunity to kind of self-reflect on who I was and how far I've come. As a fan of Metal Gear and as also someone who tries to think about games and analyze and critique them fairly and honestly to myself. But yeah, thank you for watching another rant from me on this here YouTube channel. Please do subscribe and share the video, like the video. If you haven't seen, I have a little website under the player.gg banner called Bonfire Sit. So if you go to bonfire-sit.player.gg, it will take you to my little corner of that website where I have a publication called Bonfire Sit. I'm just posting fun stuff there, and you can subscribe if you want. I also launched a podcast version of some of this stuff. It's still only got one thing in there, but I've been kind of like slowly warming my way up to publishing this stuff as MP3s as well, where I think it's appropriate. I am going to add original content to that at some point, hopefully soon. But for now, I just wanted it to be somewhere where people who want podcasts, and there were quite a few people who reached out and said they would love it as a podcast, which is why I did it. They have something that, meets their needs. So if you can find those podcasts and do me a solid and like them and review them, give them 5 stars or whatever. If you think it's 5 stars, obviously, if you think it sucks, then don't do nothing. Don't put 1 star, please. But I will see you again soon. Peace, Walker.